Good morning, Hemshech Ayin Beis, Volume 3. We're at the bottom of page 1222. And we've entered into the zone of Mutveh, Murgash, and Muskel in context of the development in Avodah, from the behavioral to the emotional to the cognitive, which is Nehi, Chagas, and Chabad. So in the new paragraph on page 1222, he said, Be'efen Elyon Yeser, to understand this in a higher level, or in a higher manner, and more, comprehensive manner as well, he introduced the three levels, Mutveh, Murgash, Muskel, which correspond to Nehi, Chagas, Chabad, and also in the language of Kabbalah, Ibbur, Yenikah, Moichin. And we started with the discussion of Ibbur or Mutveh. What he called Mutveh, he says, Teva hamidus k'moshehin beteldus betulda mebeten. B'lashon Yiddish natur. The nature of the very characteristics of a person, essentially their genetic makeup. That's their nature. This is how they're wired. And he gave a bunch of examples. Rachmani or Achzari, compassionate or aggressive or cruel, even Achzari, Kamtsunai Pazin, stingy or splurger, Rachelevav, Koshalev, soft of heart, or gentler or tougher heart, Shiflis Vesnasus, lowlier or more exalted, leadership type, Chedva or Eitzev, joyous, happy disposition versus a more sad or depressed disposition, or we'd call it despondent disposition. In general, the Chesed and Gvura, which goes positive or negative, and the same thing he brought also Hispirus and Itzuach, Teferes and Netzach. Hispirus is like pride, proud. And Itzuach is determined. So all this, he said, is nailed the teva, the eifam prati b'kol echad ve'echad. That each person is born with their particular personality characteristic types. And there's one that's not similar to another. So even though everybody has these 7 emotions, technically he mentioned 4, chesed, gvura, Teferes and Netzach, but all emotions, and yet their combination, their mix, and the way he says, the way they're specifically expressed is not similar one to the next. Everyone has their inclination, and all this is based on how it's rooted in the very root. He says, how it's rooted in the very core of a person's soul. The way it was commissioned is bar le'il. Get back to that in a moment. Then he concluded with Mutveh, ach inyan Mutveh hu shamidus hamudvoim betulda. Oh, no, we stopped there. This is where we stopped. Okay. Now, regarding this last statement, mushrashis, I recall correctly, the end of volume 2, I just didn't find it yet. Maybe some of you can help me find it. He spoke about it. I remember it was on the right side of a page. It could be, hey, may have found it right now. But there was a section we spoke about, now that I thought about it, how things are rooted in the core of the soul. I'm right now looking at page 1164. I don't see those words. I just remember seeing them. I don't want to waste time here in this class looking for it. I didn't have a chance to look. But maybe if a few of us comb through these pages, I would say that in the last 20 or 30 pages of volume 2, it was mentioned, and I think that's what the Rebbe Rashab is referring to. I don't see it right now. But regardless, I'll just tell you from what I wrote, from my recollection, what he said was, we'll look at later. When you say that something is naturally wired within us, what does that mean exactly? In the scientific language, it means that we all have genes, and our genetic makeup is very much driven by our parents. The gene code, genetic code that they pass on through their DNA to us, both father and mother. So that's in the language of science, the genes. In the language of Chassidus, that is the Shirashis, what he calls here, so just for example, when you plant apple seeds in the ground, or you plant orange seeds, or grape seeds, they're all going to produce different types of fruit. That's because the seed itself comes from a previous apple tree and has this particular genetic code. So even though the seed is still only a seed, and especially the way it was in the previous apple, that nevertheless, from the shirashis, you could say the deep-rooted, or you could say he calls here hashrashis sharshis, the rootedness, which is really not, that's redundant, but I would say something like the embedded rootedness in the embedded rootedness in the core soul would be like the previous apple has seeds. Those seeds then in turn will create another apple, and it will be similar to the original apple, and it won't be a different species. The same thing in the apples themselves, whether it's a red apple or a yellow apple. We talked about sweet apples, bitter ones, and so on. The same thing is in human beings, that when you talk about a personality type, a characteristic in Mutveh, we're not talking about anything acquired. We're talking about what makes the person, their personality type. So it's not just something superficial. It's coming from the very root of the etzem hanefesh of that person. Now, etzem hanefesh shouldn't be confused with etzem haneshama when we talk about Yom Kippur or Yechida. That's not what he's saying here. When he say etzem hanefesh, he means it's not coming from a superficial level. It's coming from the very rootedness of what this nefesh is made of. For example, in the Kutei Torah, Ba'alescha, he talks about the 7 branches of the menorah, and says that each branch reflects another type of soul. There are souls from Chesed, from Gvura, from Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yesod, Malchus. Okay, so that's more in a spiritual level. But nevertheless, there are neshamas from different places. What does that mean? That means all the way in their root. We're not talking about the root. All neshamas go back to Hashem Elokim Chaim in Kulonu Ka'echad, the Av Echad L'Kulonu. They're all, rooted in godliness. Like he says in Tanya, Chelik Elikam Mal Mamash. But later in Perik Beis in Tanya, which I'm actually just teaching that right now in my Motzei Shabbos class, he then says, and though that there are many, he says tens of thousands of levels of souls, from the highest levels of Reishei Shiftei Yisrael, the leaders, all the way to Akvayim, to the souls that are connected more to the heel. So he explains, nevertheless, they all come from the same tipa, from the Moyach Ha'av. So even though the child is born and the child has a head, the child also has, as he says, Tzipernayim has toenails. Even the nails of the toe, which are just like lowly compared to the rest of the child, they all come from one father and from one seed. So in that sense, all the souls are rooted, but then they all break into different type of souls. So Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes. So that all is Hashrasha Atzmis, or what he calls here Hashrasha Sharshis Shebetzem HaNefesh. That's the Nefesh of this category, of this person. Each one unique is a particular rooted, natural rootedness that makes him into an apple or an orange. In this case, someone that may have the nature of rachamim, like he said, rachmoni or achzari, and the other distinctions that he said here, or any other characteristic. So bottom line is this characteristic is embedded in our very nature. So we're not born neutral. Every human being in their genetic code, in their personality and characteristics, has a particular pattern, which defines your natural structure. So just like different trees, or as I said, different species have each their particular thing, and in each species, they have their particular combination or composition. Same thing as a human being, that's Mutveh, the purely natural wiring of that individual, not nature, natur. Okay. And now he's going to go on to explain, so when do we see, how can we recognize an individual's personality? So he's going to say in early stages, we don't recognize it. That's the next section here. So he says like this now. This is 6 lines from the bottom of page 1222. Ach inyan mutveh, this inyan of mutveh, which means embedded, naturally embedded, mutveh, this is how the natural composition of this individual is. Hushamidis hamutvoim betulda, that the midas, the emotional characteristics that are mutvoim, that are naturally embedded, betulda, from birth, einim nekarim klal, they're not at all obvious. The einim adayim beizgalus klal, and they're not at all yet revealed. In other words, as he's going to say in a second, that when a newborn child, all this is concealed. You don't know what type of personality this child is, even though the personality is there already. It's not going to be acquired later. The child was born with this personality. Not only to another person, even the person himself does not have in a revealed way of an awareness of the characteristics of Mutveh, the natural embedded wiring of their nature. So they're not this galus gam ba'atzmai, that they should be felt in the sense that you feel it, consciously feel it. And they're also not obvious to another. So they're basically concealed both from the individual themselves and from others. It spells it out like a child, like a newborn child. As soon as it was born, it's not obvious yet. What kind of nature this child is going to have? What emotional structure this child is going to have? What personality? Whether his nature is more like chesedic, which is one approach, more, let's say, giving or flowing, more magnanimous, or gvura, which is more restrained and maybe more introvert. I mean, there's a lot of ways to define chesed and gvura. You could say magnanimous and giving and flowing, loving. Gvura could be more measured, more internal, more seasoned, more restraint, more severe. This doesn't mean bad or good. It's not that gvura is bad and chesed is good. It's two different personality types. We also know that we all have chesed and gvura. But we're talking about now, of course, the dominant one. So a newborn child, you don't see any of this. Ibbur. And now he's explaining why it's called Ibbur, this stage. Just as it is during pregnancy. That also during pregnancy, the child already has midas. They've been developed. Remember, the physiological and the psychological and the emotional makeup of a child doesn't happen when they're born. It's through the 9 months of process of gestation and pregnancy where it develops. So there's also midas. Just as they're not at all obvious. Same too. So too, as soon as he's born, they also are there within him, this personality features, this characteristics. But the utter katnus here means in a diminished state. Katnus as in, like cotton means small, but here it means katnus, that's what a cotton is small, means completely diminished. Then utterly in the katnus state, which means they're vahelim and concealed. She'enim nirkadim v'nirgashim klal, they're not at all recognizable or felt. Next page, 1223. Loi ba'atzmei v'loi luzulase. And he repeats that, not to himself and not to another. Now he's going to explain, according to this, Mutveh has another meaning. Mutveh, till now, we were talking about the natural. Basically something by nature, not by nurture, not acquired. So Rebbe Rashab says, Mutveh, according to this explanation, in Mutveh, that is completely concealed, so that we can look at as incidental. He says, no, that's one of the reasons it's called Mutveh. From the Lashon of Lefizeh Mashanikra Mutveh, Lashon Tovu b'Yamsuf. Tovu means submerged. Tovu means sunk in. We say Tovu b'Yamsuf, they sunk into the water. So why is it called Tovu? Because Teva and Tovu conceals whatever object you put into it. When you say something is submerged, you put an object in water, what happens? The object is there, but it's concealed under the water. That's one of the reasons Chassidus explains why Teva is called Teva. Because when you look at nature, it conceals the divine energy within it. You could say, you know what, this is natural. The sun comes up in the morning. It's nature. The trees are growing, natural. The seasons are changing. It's nature. Alter Rebbe actually in Tanya says nature is a word we use for anything we don't understand. It's natural. But the truth is that Teva is concealing. Unless, Chassidus says, an open miracle, you see the hand of God. You see the suspension of nature. You see something that's different. But nature has that ability to just conceal that which is beneath it. Just to drive the point home, I don't like to use this example, but it's a powerful example. I remember reading, I think it was Abe Rosenthal, was a very famous columnist in the New York Times for many years. He's no longer with us, but he wrote that when he was a young cub reporter. So he's one of the first journalists that went into the camps, concentration camps, after they were liberated, Auschwitz or one of these real death camps. And in this very riveting and chilling article, he describes that he sees on the ground, I don't remember the exact words, but the content was he says, you see grass growing and you see the earth. And when you look closely, you can sense and see, even see, and definitely smell the smell of death. And all the ashes of human remains and all the rest that was there. I know it's morbid and so on, but the point I wanted to make was that he was saying how nature, in its own way, covers up the sins and the crimes and even the tragedies that happen beneath it. It absorbs, we talk sometimes, the blood being absorbed by the earth. So nature has a very cruel side to it in a way, that it conceals that which is beneath it. Things could have happened in a certain place, and then when nature takes over, the sun is shining, the sky is blue, the birds are chirping, the grass is growing, and you can say, you know what, everything is nice, when in truth, there's much more going on beneath the surface. I just wanted to point out how nature has, obviously God's nature, but that's what Eibishter made Teva. Teva in its consistency, and in its consistency, lo yushbesu, it never changes. So on one hand, it reflects on God's infinite power of something that's unwavering. But on the other, it tovu b'yamsuf, it conceals that which is beneath it. And that's why people can say, that was just a natural event. What do you mean? What is it? The Baal Shem Tov says, from the Chacham Tzvi and others, that nature is basically many miracles. The difference between nature and miracle is only frequency. Means if it happens many times, what he calls nisim tkufes or nisim asmides, and if a miracle happens many times, one after the other, you call it nature, because it's regular. But the regular is concealing that energy within. I know I use very strong examples. I just wanted to drive the point home how teva comes from the word tovu b'yamsuf, So Mutveh now means, in addition to the word nature, also comes from and emphasizes the focus on the meaning of being sunk in, submerged, concealed in this context. While Piposhet, as the Rebbe Rashab, on a very basic level, it means Hu she'ein kan rak hatfa lo yizgalas davar. So this is like the deeper meaning in it, than what nature is about. But al Piposhet, it means that you don't have at this stage, all you have is the natural wiring, but it's not revealed. Lo yizgalas davar. So the hadva is there. This child, this newborn child, has those characteristics. They're embedded, but they're not in any state of revelation. So they're called Mutveh. Tachlis hakatnus v'tachlis hahelem. Okay. Rak acher gidulei b'shonim k'tzas yovei hakol legili. Only after growing and maturing in years, a few years, k'tzas. You don't need a lot. In just a few years, all will come revealed. In other words, the characteristics of the child will become revealed. In all the details of his midas, and now comes stage 2. Remember, Ibbur, Mutveh, now will come Murgash and Yenikah. How does it come alive? How do they come revealed? Because now the child is developing and growing through nursing, through being fed. Through nursing, the milk of his mother, that causes not just physical growth, but also the development of his midas. So that's why this second stage is called Yenikah. The child is being nursed and growing and developing, and the midas are emerging in the process. It's still in a childlike way, but it's no longer totally concealed. I'm going to stop in a few minutes to get questions or comments. I just want to finish the topic. So he says now like this, the longer parentheses, we develop this a little further. Basically, in the parentheses, he's going to say that just as the physical body of the child develops, so too our midas develop. The kishem shechemer mizgadol al yedei hayenikah. Below they say chemer haguf. I don't know if it's necessary to add haguf, because chemer can mean the very matter of the child, but they added the word body. Let's say, I don't see a need to add it. You could say just as the chemer, meaning that's what Rebbe Rashab is focusing, just as the matter, the material, the very physical material and matter of the child, Mizgadol grows, ayidei hayenikah, through the nursing, meaning through the feeding of the child. So the Rebbe Rashab explains why. Now, on a physical level, it's very clear. As a child eats more, that's how they grow. But the Rebbe Rashab goes deeper. It's more than just physical sustenance. It's it's also the pleasure in the milk that the child is drinking, nursing, that causes the growth. Now, we need to understand, why does he have to add tainug? And let's say the child doesn't have pleasure from the milk, it just sustains them without pleasure. I guess pleasure here, the way I would understand it, is because as we've been learning, pleasure in general expands everything. When you eat something you like, in many ways, it feeds you more and nourishes you more. When you eat something you don't like, it still nourish you and sustain you, but it doesn't have quite the same, I guess the word for it would be the same energy. That's what it sounds like he's saying here. And that's why the growth, relatively speaking, during these Yemei Hanikah, during the nursing years or the nursing days, Yemei Hanikah means the period when a child nurses, is be'erech yeser ma'gidul sha'achar. In other words, the early stages of a child's development, there's much more growth going on than later. Now, I know you'll say, 1 second, you usually see a child at 10, 11 years old, they really suddenly spurt in height and other things. But there's certain development that happens early stages that far is greater than what happens afterwards in the early development. Maybe we need to have some medical and professionals to give us examples of that. But let me first read and learn inside, and then we'll try to explain it. Why is that? He's saying because the primary growth is from the pleasure. Like we know, Mayim makes things grow. So he says this in Tanya in the beginning, end of chapter 1. And why is Mayim connected to the Taivas? Because everything that we have pleasure from comes from Mayim. Mayim matzmich v'zeh machmas hatainuk shebehem. So Mayim has a refreshing element to it, and that's why it also causes things. So due to the Mayim shematzmichim, that's why it makes things grow, because Mayim itself is a refreshing, pleasurable force, you can say. Kamoy Kain, same thing, like Mayim. Ha'odam eitz asada goes back to that. The person that's compared to the tree in the field, shetzameach mekatnus legadlus, that grows from small to large. His growth is coming not just from the sustenance, but from a deeper energy, a deeper pleasure. So just as it is with the physical body, so too the growth of the midas, the maturing and the growth or the revelation of the emotions, through the milk that's being the nursing milk and the tainug that's in it. So there's a pleasure that comes in it that increases this growth. V'hu shaboyim begilik tzas. And this level of Yenikah is now that these emotions have come now, tzas, somewhat revealed. You know what? I'll stop here, even though we're still in the middle of the topic. I'll stop here because there's a lot of different ideas that need to be unpacked here. And I'll stop if anybody has any questions.
It's what to say, Heshmei Rabbah, we expand. And when they gave, and he became the
king, when he became
the king, his foot, you know, it's some
Shmua Teva to Dashin. Yeah, but he's referring to is it says in the Gemara in Gittin that when who was it, Rabbi, one of the Tanoim met the future emperor, and he said to him, honored him as being the next king. So he said, "I'm not the next king." So he said to him, "You will be." And then the news arrived that the emperor had died and he was appointed king. Yechon ben Zakkai. Yechon ben Zakkai said it to who? To Vespasianus?
Aspasianus Caesar.
And it says that when he heard that he's the emperor, that Shmua Teva to Dashin Etzem, it says a good news causes the actual bone to expand, and he couldn't put a shoe. They were going to put a shoe on him. His attendant was going to put a shoe. The shoe didn't fit on the foot. So
he had already one shoe. After that, he wanted to put it.
So Chassidus brings this, that Tainug causes physical expansion. When a person is in a state of pleasure, things grow, they develop and grow. He doesn't bring that here, but it definitely is part of the story here. That there's no question that the growth, but here, there, I don't know how long it lasted. Once the news was over, I'm sure his foot went back to regular. Here, he's speaking about a sustainable growth, that the tainug that comes in this stage actually helps the physical growth of the child and also the emotional growth. So it's interesting. It's not just the milk itself, it's the pleasure. Now, the pleasure doesn't necessarily mean because the milk is so tasty. It could also be the very fact that he's being nurtured and being nursed, that all that is a pleasurable experience, and the child is being nurtured, not just fed. And that nurturing is part of this growth of tainug as well. That's what it sounds like he's saying. But okay, yeah. Thanks for adding that. Good.
That's a very specific. Shmua Teva to Dashin Otza.
Yeah. Any other questions? Not, I'll just continue because it's not finished the topic. Okay, so let me continue. So he continues now and says like this. So we come now to the first stage, Mutveh, Ibbur. The emotions are completely concealed, even though they're there. The emotional characteristics. the natural characteristics. Yenikah and Murgash, which he's going to mention in a moment, is now there's become something has been revealed that comes through that stage of nursing that grows and gets more revealed, but k'tzas. So he says, v'hagam, shemalubus b'b'chinas katnus the nairus, that even though these emotions of this child are manifest not in any mature way, it's in a very childish way. Nairus means childhood behavior. So yes, you can see a child playing and you can already start seeing a personality, but it's not seen in any full-blown, sophisticated way. It's in childish behavior. Nevertheless, but at that stage, you can already recognize him. The nature of his midah, his essential nature in all his midas. So still, yes, in a childish form, but you could already start recognizing his personality type, the characteristics that were concealed in stage one. How and what he'll be like when he grows up, when he becomes older. And Gemara says this, butzin, it's an expression that Rabbi uses from the Gemara. It means that even in childhood, you could already recognize what kind of person this will be. The Rebbe brings it in context, sometimes the Rebbe Rashab or the other Rabbeim, when we heard about their childhood behavior, like the Rebbe Rashab crying when he went into the Tzemach Tzedek, or other similar stories. So means they already see, even though he's still a child, but you could already start seeing the what's going to come of this person. You know, when Moshe Rabbeinu, for example, pulls off the crown from Pare's head, so immediately it frightened Pare, and that's when he was about to kill the child, and they asked his advisors, and one said, it's just a child. Yisrael said he's just a child, it means nothing. The other one said, Bilam said, kill him immediately. It means everything. It means he's threatening, he's going to ultimately threaten your leadership. And it was Eov, the third advisor, that said, the test, put a bowl of coals and a bowl of jewels in front of the child, and let's see what he picks. If he picks the jewels, you'll know it wasn't just a childish thing. This is a special child. So the Medrash says that Moshe was about to take the jewels. The Malach pushed his hand and he took the coal. And the child, what does the child do? He put the coal to his lips, to his tongue. And that's what caused, technically, physically caused the aral sfasayim, Moshe's inability or difficulty speaking. So you see, as a child, you could already see, at children, they already have something. You can see some of their personality even in child. Just an example. Obviously, Moshe is a great example, Moshe Rabbeinu. But what he's saying is, butzin mekatfer yediyah, that butzin, even as butzin, which is as drops, you already see, you can know the personality. I'm trying to remember the Gemara's context is a bit interesting. I remember looking it up. It's a little different than what we usually assume. But the punchline is what I just said. So though it's true that the midas have not yet fully developed in an adult, mature way, it's still, like he says, katnus and maisa katnus. The maisa nairus, in other words, it's still in a childish level, but you can already tell the personality emerging in this individual.
It's hard to tell, for me at least, it's hard for me to tell my children or my grandchildren's personality when I see them as a baby, a newborn. But after the fact, as I reflect now, I can look at them and see their personality after I'm an adult, and they're adults, and I can see that after the fact. I don't know if other people could look. You guys got to be a tzaddik to look at the beginning.
Well, let's put it this way. It's definitely more developed than stage one, where a newborn, you see nothing. You know, that's what he said, or like in pregnancy, because at, let's say, age 2, so the child is going to definitely exhibit some behavior. Now, maybe you need to be trained, but to say that there's the midas of the personality of the child are completely concealed, not. So it's a question of measure. And he's speaking now that second level. Okay. V'nigdalim hamidus ma'at ma'at, and the midas, these emotional characteristics grow and mature, ma'at ma'at, slowly, slowly, b'meshech hashanim, through the years, the ben gimel, the daled, 3 years old, 4 years old, the gimel v'dalet shanim, that 3 and 4 year old years, ad she yigdal kol tzarchei shamidus mizgadlim umizgalim. To the point that it grows kol tzarchei to its fullest, to its full capacity, as much as needed. In other words, it's blossomed to full maturity. That then they're in a state tamidus mizgadlim, they grow, umizgalim, and they get revealed. So it's a process. It's a process that began with Mutveh, the natural wiring that's concealed. Which is Ibbur, went to Yenikah, which starts getting revealed and continues to grow until full maturity. V'zeu hanikra Murgash b'chlal. And this second level is called Murgash in general. Murgash, it's not Mutveh. Mutveh was Teva, nature, and also concealed. Murgash in general, sheyesh kan midas b'izgalus. We now have emotional characteristics that are revealed, a state of revelation. Shem b'chinas gili dover ma ba'atzmai v'niglim el azulos. So they're revealed. Like he said before, the first state was not revealed, not to the person, not to others. Here, there's some revelation, dover ma, ba'atzmai, to himself, and also revealed, niglim el azulos, to another. Ube'etzem amidus, however, the very core characteristics of these emotions, ein kol chadash be'etzem toyeram. There's nothing new in the very core definition or the core description or the core personality and parameters. Or toyeram is their description. Hainu ba'atvos hamidus, meaning in the natural rooted midas that we spoke about when the person is born, this wired this way. Shaloi Yeshuna b'tivei mehepuch lehepuch. This second stage is fundamentally has not changed any of the midas. It's exactly as they were, and definitely it's not that it changes from one extreme to the other, from one, like saying from chesed to gvura, like from compassion to aggression, or compassion to the opposite of compassion. What's the opposite of compassion? Cruelty. Lack of compassion. Achzorius means actually cruel, when a person is cruel or insensitive. Ukahai gavna. Rakshem izgadlim umizgalim. What happened is that they've grown and they've become revealed. So Mutveh and Murgash is really the difference, fundamental difference is not in the very nature of the personality, it's how developed and how revealed it is. That's the key thing he makes here. So Murgash is Mutveh in a developed and revealed way, not fully, because it's the process that goes from Mutveh and Murgash. We'll still have to learn about Muskal, level number 3. But that he's not going to get back to, I believe, till a little later. Okay. So that ends this paragraph on page 1223. Now, take a fuller stop and pause. And let's hear if anyone wants to ask anything or clarify anything. Okay. Yeah, I guess after we flexed our muscles to the levels of Hisnasus, Atzmi, and Lifnei Tzimtzum, and all that, this is like, I don't want to, no pun intended, I don't want to call it child's play, but much easier stuff to understand at this point.
Why are they calling it Be'oifen Elyon Yosel?
That we'll have to see. I asked that question yesterday. Not sure yet. I'd see the full picture, what he's going to say. It's definitely more comprehensive and more all-encompassing. But I'm not sure yet. I want to see how he finishes the subject matter. Okay. So let's continue. V'hinei, and now, the new paragraph on page 1223. V'hinei, And now on the Royim, we see Shagadlus Hamidus. Shagadolas Hamidus. That the growth and maturity of the emotions, it's not just in their revelation, they become more and more revealed. He's now going to explain it's not just a quantitative growth, where the midas were concealed and now they're becoming revealed. That actually the midas are, the object of the midas are bedvarim gdelim yeser. An older child or older person, a more mature person, is going to want to express their emotions in things that are more mature and more sophisticated. The bekotten mideisav heim bedvarim ktanim. By a child, his emotions are about small things. Look what makes a child excited. It's all going to be very small things. A child, you give them a toy. You take something away from them. It's all childish matters. Ubegadlus heim bedvarim gdelim. When the person gets older, the midas are the interest, the ava, yira, and all the different midas are about greater matters. Try to give an adult Lego or some toys to play with. Maybe there's some people that still like to play with that, but many would prefer reading a book or enjoying something else that's of a higher caliber. So in other words, the midas of the person, the characteristics for a child, are going to be expressed in childish matters. And for someone older, it's going to be in greater matters, more superior matters. The dvarim aktanim, and the small things, the petty or the more superficial things, or the childish things, that he desires when he's young as a child, he doesn't at all have any desire in them when he gets older. No interest at all. And on the contrary, whom is bayish behem, he's embarrassed by them. If you give a semi-adult or a full adult to play with little things that children play with, it'll be an embarrassment. I tried this, by the way. I tried an experiment. I once was seeing some of my nephews and nieces playing, little children, and I got down on the floor to start playing with them. So besides the fact that they saw me as like something's the matter with me, they wouldn't accept me into their club, for obvious reasons. I don't think just my size, it's just that it wasn't natural. But I saw, I wasn't embarrassed. I maybe have been embarrassed if it was published, but for me, it was an experiment. But that's not how adults behave. To put it in very simple avoida terms, if someone comes over to you, I once used this example from Moyach Shalant al Alev of just how adult behavior. Someone comes over to you and starts insulting you in public, you're going to be insulted, and you may even reciprocate, and you're going to be hurt. If a 2-year-old came over and kicked and scratched you, my hope would be that you wouldn't get down on all fours and start fighting with this child. Why? Because it's not the same league. The child is a little child. Now, unfortunately, there are some adults chronologically who emotionally still have 2-year-old tendencies. The only thing is their pride doesn't let them, they don't reveal it, but they get as angry, when you look at road rage or other emotional reactions that are completely childish. But that's not a separate discussion. The point here that he's making is that generally speaking, childish interests and the emotions of the child and the emotions of an adult, even though it's the same emotional characteristics, is not just that it's more revealed, it's also in matters that are more sophisticated. And an adult not only wouldn't have interest in childish games or childish pleasures and emotional reactions of a child, he'd actually be embarrassed by them. That's what he says, Beis behem. So the Rebbe Rashab now is going to analyze what that means. Does that mean that the midas go through some change? Or is this coming from some other factor in the maturity process? So he says, you have to say that this shift of what the midas of an adult compared to a child are like is not coming from the very midas themselves. It's not the characteristics. It's not the fact that you're a rachmanis, that a child has the teva of, let's say, compassion. And when you're an adult, the compassion is to bigger things. So he says it's not coming from midas themselves. This is due to the seichel. In other words, the seichel has matured. So therefore, a child's compassion may be to small little things. You see compassion, but it's like childish compassion. And then the child grows older, the compassion will be to the right place, directed in the right place. So he says that's coming mitzad ha-seichel. Because emotions on their own don't change. Like we see by animals. They are natural, impulsive creatures in their very core nature. That's what he means, tivim. In other words, if a lion or a predator or any other needs to hunt, there's no talking logic here. They're driven by their emotional impulses. We spoke about seichel hanikner, das hanikner. They use their mind, but it's all around their survival and their being, their existence. So he says, we see by nature, their nature will never change. A leopard cannot change its spots, and a tiger can't change its stripes, as they say. The nature of an animal will never change. It's not subject to change. So he's bringing from that proof. And a human being where the natural inclination of his emotions change, he means, at least in the context that he wants, we're not talking about he changed his whole personality. In the fact that he now desires, like if you came to a lion and said, instead of going hunting after a prey, why don't you read a book? The lion's not going to respond to that. A human being, can direct their emotional interests to something more superior. That's due to the intelligence of the human being, not the midas themselves. Shamanig is a midas that guides, directs, and governs the emotions. And indicates to them and directs them to and guides them what they should desire, what they shouldn't desire. In other words, if we had no seichel, hypothetically, I'm talking about seichel, real seichel, not seichel for survival. So the difference between a 5-year-old and a 20-year-old would not change. A 5-year-old lion and a 20-year-old lion hunts the same way, its emotions are affected in the same way, everything is the same. So what makes a human being different is the seichel directs the emotions to be directed elsewhere, to not behave in an immature way, emotions that just are drawn into immature things and to be drawn to mature things. That's the That's the Rebbe Rashab's proof that this shift is not due to the emotions themselves, it's due to the seichel imposing itself and directing the emotions. Ukiyadua. I'm going to stop. If you have any questions, just give me another few lines. As it's known, as it's known, the seichel is like a moed derech, like a guide, like a map, like a GPS, a navigator. Moed derech, it directs for the midas, the emotions. And even though those same midas, when you're older, are just as they were when you were born, as we said, it's the same midas. Nothing changed. What has changed is, besides that they've grown and they're revealed, now their behavior, they're being directed and guided by seichel that's telling these emotions where to be directed, where to use them and how to use them and so on. According to seichel yehelel ish, a person is praised. Or a person will praise. According to the mind, according to the intelligence, it says below, accordingly, midas will be the emotions in bekatnus, or in a so-called more diminished or immature state, or begadlus, or in a more mature state. So based on this, if that's the case, Gam tchilas ha'yiseres amidu ha'idei ha'seichel. So also the beginning of the awakening of this midah is also with seichel. In other words, seichel is causing the midah to be guided. It's not changing the emotion, it's guiding it and directing it. What do you mean, gam tchilas eseres hamida? Does he mean that even in the early stages of Yenikah, it's also guided, or does he mean that once you become an adult, the beginning of a midah, not just once the midah starts, the whole awakening of the midah is guided by the seichel? Probably the latter. So it's still not finished, but I'll stop here for a moment. Anybody?
What can you comment on in the expressive that it took him his whole lifetime to change a midah? What does that mean?
Yeah, that's a different discussion than here, because this is more natural growth. Like, for example, you don't need a lot of training when you're 20 years old. You should be sitting on the floor and playing with little toys. You don't need an avodah for that. The natural growth of the seichel, what you're describing now, is true hard avodah, where a chassid or a person worked on changing a midah. Like you could suppress, let's say a person has achzarius in them, a certain lack of compassion, insensitivity. So you can suppress it to some extent. But changing a midah is a very difficult and big work. There's the expression, l'shanis teva midesav, l'shanis midas hativim. That is far, far greater than here. We're going to talk about it, by the way, but later, not at this stage yet. Here he's not talking more about how from Mutveh goes to Murgash, that the maturity process has settled in, that your interests are more superior. But we haven't yet gotten to the point of actually going and changing a very personality feature, if that's even possible. Even though it does say in Chassidus it is, but generally speaking, mostly it's about suppressing or guiding emotions, not about transforming, even though there is that concept, but that's going to come later. We're not yet ready for that one. Any other questions or comments? There's more to come here. I'll just questions. Do we stop here, or should I continue reading? I'll read a few more lines. Okay. Vagam shamida hitivis boy. And though the midah it's natural, it's natural to him. So what are we saying? That you can guide a midah. A midah is the way you're wired. Can the mind, for example, change the size of your fingers? No. That's the structure of your body. If you're 5'10", as much as seichel will come, it can't change your very composition of your physical body. So what is it? So he wants to explain further. What does it mean that the seichel is affecting the midas? The midah is part of our natural makeup. And yet we see the seichel does affect. So he's going to elaborate a bit more. He says, Vagam, shamida hitivis, boy, that the midas is part of his natural being. Shabbateva midesev hu chazdan v'oyev, in the nature of his composition, the natural characteristic of his midas, that he's a chazdan, he's a kind person, v'oyev, and a loving person, and love someone. Oy, the opposite, ragzon v'seina. He's an angry and hateful person. Ukahai gavna. See, the Rebbe Rashab has widened the repertoire of the emotional makeup of a person. He seems to suggest that ragzon and seina is actually natural to a person. But let's leave that aside for right now. The point is that this is part of who you're wired. This is how you're wired, just like the other parts of your being. So then why are you saying that the seichel has an impact on this, in a sense? So he's now going to explain how both are necessary. The midas themselves grow. Like we said, they grow and they become more revealed. And the seichel has impact on them. So there's two things really going on in the maturity process. It's not just that we have the same midas as we were 2 years old. Yes, we have the same makeup. But the midah is also developed. He's going to explain. And the seichel, of course, is also part of the process. So he says, Ach zeu hefresh ben katnus legadlus. That's taka the difference between katnus and godless, between immature and mature. The bekatnus, how you say this, amida, hirak mitzad hatva. The stimulation of an emotion is only due to how you're naturally wired. That's why a child, for example, you take away their toy, they start crying. You try to talk to them, it doesn't always work. Why? Because their natural midah is in its raw form, and it just reacts impulsively. So the midah itself goes through it. When a child, the midah does not, seichel cannot speak to it. The midah of an adult, the seichel can speak to. So you have to say the midah also has somewhat become receptive. Because if it's the same midah of a 2-year-old, then why suddenly seichel speaking to it? So now the midah itself has become grown to the point that it is Chassidus misad seichel. Even though the very nature of the midah, Chassidus itself, is like its nature, the etzem and the core emotion. In other words, the being chesed is not coming from seichel; it's coming from the midah. In bechesed or begvura, whether it's in the form of chesed or gvura, because as we said, the midas don't change fundamentally. The gamatiyas seichel kafi hatfa mipnei sheshasher ba'ashrosh atzmis. He's adding now also the seichel. Why some people seichel lead somebody one direction, another direction. He says is also according to the nature of how the mind works. We'll talk about that later. That's like, I don't want to confuse matters, but I just didn't want to skip the parentheses. So the seichel also has inclinations that are natural. It's not just pure objective seichel, everybody the same. But we'll talk about that later. So even though the midas themselves don't change in their fundamental nature, and the Chassidus is of the midah, yet it's Chassidus mitzad seichel. The seichel is involved in its stimulation. So in other words, we need to understand this almost subtle approach. There's the midas. In animals, they never change. In a human being, the seichel directs them to larger things, but the midah itself is listening now. So you have to say that the midah has the same, on one hand, it's exactly the same midah as you were born with. On the other hand, the midah is listening to the seichel and being directed accordingly. I'm not saying it's fully understood, but clearly you see the Rebbe Rashab struggling to explain both parts, that it's on one hand, it's a midah. It didn't become seichel. On the other hand, the seichel is involved in its development and in its expression.
It's oirerus amida, he's calling it.
Yeah.
It's oirerus amida. The seichel is oirer the midah.
Okay. Now he's going to explain this, but because of time, we'll explain it tomorrow. We'll learn it further. Dehine, because Dehine is clearly, because now he's going to explain this point. But this is what he's now. Now you may wonder why is it important to split these hairs and all these details. Well, if we're going to transform a post-Simpson reality, we're going to transform ourselves, where we begin with a Simpson life where godliness is concealed, and we want to reveal the divine within us, the divine above us, and even Einoid, Havaya Ulikim, B'Shamayim Mimal V'Aretz Mitachas, and even Einoid, that the very darkness itself also is going to reveal. We need, as in the context of interface, go step by step by step. So it's critical to understand how an impulsive, emotional person who would usually give into their animal soul's impulses, like he explains in Tanya, can learn to train themselves and tame our emotions and direct them properly. But you don't want to annihilate the emotions. You don't want to overwhelm them. You want them to grow. So on one hand, you want the emotions to be as they are in their nature. On the other hand, you want them to be guided properly by the seichel. So it's vital to understand how Chabad is going to affect Chagas and Ihi, like in the context of what we're learning. That's why this is so critical, because you really want to understand and dissect the very anatomy of how an emotional creature that's driven by subjective self-interest becomes somewhat of a more refined human being to become a keli telekus, to godliness. That's why it's so critical to understand every step here. But we're still in the middle. So if you have questions, it's perfectly fine because the subject is not over. I'm going to stop by the words Dihine Anuroyim. And we will continue.